Welcome, everyone. I am so happy you joined me for this first episode. I know the title may be a bit of a clickbait, but I promise today's episode is about an important issue that needs to be addressed. Today, we will be discussing the topic of internalized misogyny. You may have heard of this term before and sort of understood what it was about, but if you're curious like me, you may be wondering, what exactly is internalized misogyny? Well, we'll figure it out together today. The short definition would be when a woman internalizes sexist attitudes and beliefs about herself and other women. This can have serious consequences for a woman's mental and emotional well-being, as well as their relationship and careers. But let's not go too quickly. It is important to talk about this topic because unfortunately internalized misogyny is very common. Many women struggle with it on a daily basis, and it can be difficult to recognize and address. But by raising awareness about this issue and understanding its sources and effects, we can work to challenge and overcome internalized misogyny. First, let's define our terms so that we are all on the same page here. Sexism is defined as the belief, practice, or system that supports the idea that the male sex is intrinsically superior to the female sex. Studies have shown that sexism is a prevalent form of prejudice that most women experience on a weekly and sometimes daily basis. By the way, all of the studies that I will be referencing can be found in the podcast description. There are two major types of sexist beliefs: hostile sexism and benevolent sexism. Hostile sexism aims to validate the male power and traditional gender roles. For instance, imagine a male co-worker who consistently interrupts female colleagues during meetings, dismisses their suggestions as cute or silly, and makes comments about how women are too emotional to handle certain tasks. Benevolent sexism takes a romanticized view of heterosexual relationships and recognizes men's dependence on women. Benevolent sexism may be subtler, but it can be just as harmful as hostile sexism. An example of benevolent sexism could be a man who compliments female colleagues on their appearance or personality only, rather than their work or accomplishments. While the man may believe that he's being supportive and friendly, his comments could be interpreted as objectifying and patronizing, and could make the woman feel uncomfortable or undervalued. Studies have found that women who experience higher level of hostile sexism also report feeling hostility towards non-traditional groups, such as career women or feminists. And this leads us directly to the actual topic of today. Internalized misogyny can be composed of self-objectification and passive acceptance of gender roles, and it is linked to a range of negative outcomes, including but not only identity foreclosure, which is when an individual adopts an identity without exploration or consideration of other possibilities. For example, a person may feel pressure to conform to traditional gender roles and assume the role of caregiver or provider without considering other possibilities for their relationship or their own personal goal and aspirations. It can also cause psychological distress, disordered eating, and mental illness. One way to understand internalized misogyny is through the process of coping. Coping refers to the process of dealing with and managing stressful or challenging situations, emotions, or thoughts. Research shows that internalization is a common coping method for individuals facing societal stressors, such as discrimination. However, this method is considered maladaptive, which means that it can be harmful and ultimately make the situation worse, as it can increase the risk of adverse mental health outcomes. Internalized misogyny can be particularly powerful because it often stems from early experiences with people that a woman trusts, such as family members and close friends. The influence of oppression can be both external, harassment, prejudice, discrimination, and internal, believing in negative stereotypes about one's group. The sources of internalized misogyny can be divided into four main categories: cultural and societal messages, The context is set around being exposed to cultural and societal messages that reinforce patriarchal norms, which are social norms that sustain a system in which men hold primary power and predominate in roles of political leadership, moral authority, social privilege, and control of property. And it also centered around gender-based stereotypes, such as the belief that men are superior to women or that women's primary value lies in their appearance. These messages can be communicated through various sources, such as media, education, religion, and other institutions, and can contribute to the internalization of sexist beliefs. Family and personal relationships. Family members, romantic partners, and close friends can also contribute to the internalization of misogyny by perpetuating sexist beliefs and attitudes. Women may also internalize as a result of abuse or mistreatment by these individuals. Note that intergenerational sexism, where sexist beliefs and attitudes are passed down from generation to generation, can also play a role in perpetuating it. Experiences of gender-based discrimination. Women who have experienced gender-based discrimination, such as sexual harassment or unequal pay, may internalize sexist beliefs as a means of coping with or explaining their experiences. Research has shown that experiences of gender-based discrimination can lead to the normalization of gender expectation, such as the expectation that women are primarily responsible for childcare and domestic duties, while men are expected to be the primary breadwinners. And the consequences of disobedience to those expectations are also normalized, and they can include punishment, ostracism, shaming, and abuse, verbal and physical. Participants in the studies reported that expectation and consequences were enacted and modeled by women, including grandmothers, mothers, female teachers, and friends. Women may internalize as a result of comparing themselves to other women and feeling inferior. For example, a woman may internalize the belief that she's not good enough because she does not measure up to societal beauty standards. Let's summarize this up. Women are faced to cope with misogyny coming generally from society, which takes 4 major forms: direct or indirect messages, biased interpersonal relationships, unsolicited comparison, and straight discrimination. As we briefly mentioned already, internalized misogyny can take many different forms, including self-criticism and self-doubt, which is when a woman frequently focuses on her appearance, intelligence, or abilities. And this can result in feelings of low self-esteem and lack of confidence. It is important to mention that these symptoms are exacerbated by many other factors who thrive on sexism and insecurities. Another form is prioritizing the opinion of men. Women who internalize misogyny may prioritize the opinion and perspective of men over their own, even in situations where their own opinions would be more appropriate or valuable. Please note that this behavior, as all of the others, may be unconscious, which means that the person doesn't realize that it's happening. A third form is sabotaging other women. Internalized misogyny can also manifest as a tendency to undermine or sabotage other women, particularly in professional or competitive settings. This can take the form of jealousy, toxic competition, or spreading negativity about other women. The fourth form may be internalizing gender-based stereotypes. Women who internalize misogyny may internalize also gender-based stereotypes, such as the belief that women are emotional and irrational, or that they are not cut for certain jobs or roles. The last form, and I think one of the most discussed in the media, is self-objectification. Sexual objectification is the process of reducing a person to their physical attributes and treating them as a sexual object rather than a whole person, with thoughts, feeling, and agency. This can happen in many different contexts, such as media representation of women, sexual harassment in the workplace, or even everyday interactions between people. The study starts by reminding us that there are plenty of other studies examining the negative consequences of sexual objectification for the target. However, the processes related to the person who is actually acting the sexual objectification have gone understudied. In this study, they focused on self-regulation as one of the social psychological mechanisms involved in the perpetuation of sexual objectification. Self-regulation refers to the ability of individuals to control and manage their own behaviors, thoughts, and emotion in response to internal and external stimuli. Because people experience this representation of women frequently and unavoidably in so many facets of their social universe, the study specifically hypothesized that sexually objectifying sexualized women versus non-sexualized women may be especially culturally entrenched in people's knowledge bases. This means that it has been passed down from generation to generation and has become deeply embedded in our collective consciousness. The study's conceptual understanding of self-regulation emerges from the self-regulatory model, or SSR, from the Handbook of Self-Regulation, where self-regulation is characterized as the capacity to override an initial impulse to engage in a particular behavior and replacing it with another response. An easy example of this would be choosing a healthy snack rather than going straight to the sweets jar. What is really interesting to know is that evidence indicates that self-regulatory resources are limited in daily supply and can be partially depleted by the exertion of self-regulatory efforts. To say this more easily, each day we start with a certain amount of self-regulatory capacity, which can be depleted by using it throughout the day. For example, if you spend the day trying to resist the temptation to eat unhealthy foods, control your emotion in a difficult conversation, or stay focused on challenging tasks, you may use up a significant amount of your self-regulatory resources. As a result, you find that later in the day, you have less self-control, and you are more likely to give in to impulses or make impulsive decisions. This study conducted 3 experiences to prove the assumption that not objectifying a sexualized woman will result in depletion effects. The first one was to prove a correlation between self-control and objectification. The second one wanted to prove that engage in more or less objectification depletes regulatory resources. The third one was to show that objectifying a sexualized woman, but not objectifying a non-sexualized woman, influence regulatory resources. In other words, to prove that when participants were in a state of depletion, so they were feeling mentally drained, they were more likely to see a sexualized woman as an object, rather than a whole person. This depletion didn't have an effect on how participants viewed a non-sexualized woman. All of the 3 studies were proved as correct, which means that when participants were asked to perform a mentally tiring task after not objectifying a sexualized image, they performed more poorly than the neutral group. Inversely, participants showed a greater level of objectification of the target when they were mentally tired from performing a depleting task, rather than the non-tired group. This means that it's sort of embedded in us to sexualize someone just because it's easier and we're used to do it. Notably, across the 3 studies, the relationship between objectification and self-regulation did not vary as a function of the participants' gender. Both women and men exhibited greater depletion effects when not objectifying sexualized women. This last statement links this very interesting study to what we've been discussing in this episode: how women can be perpetrators as much as men due to internalization. The reason why I wanted to include this in the podcast is to prove how easily we fall into the habits that we've constructed socially about one another. I believe, however, that once we are aware about said automatic behavior, we can be more conscious on whether acting on it or not. By this point, it is clear that internalized misogyny refers to negative attitudes and beliefs that women have internalized about themselves and other women as a result of the misogyny existing in our society, and it can have a profound impact on women's mental health. One study from 2018 found that women reported internalizing sexist beliefs an average of 11 times per 10-minute increment of conversation. This means that during a 10-minute conversation, the women in the study reported internalizing sexist beliefs on an average of 11 times, more than once a minute. This shows how prevalent sexism is in our society, without us even being conscious about it. This puts in a different light all of the other consequences of this biased and unequal context. I would like to quickly touch on rape culture because I think it's a great example of this attitude, although it deserves another episode on its own. Rape culture is defined as the societal beliefs and attitudes that normalize and minimize sexual abuse. It perpetuates internalized misogyny by blaming the victim and protecting the perpetrator in instances of gender violence. Many participants in research studies reported that they experienced sexist encounters and beliefs starting in childhood and continuing throughout their lives, with none of the impacts reported being positive. This traumatic and repetitive instance can lead, if we follow the logic used so far, to internalization of these occurrences as a coping mechanism, minimizing it in the long run, which I want to make loud and clear: it's not okay and it's wrong. To combat internalized misogyny, it is important to first acknowledge its presence and come to terms with any biases. Researching and understanding societal norms and gender norms, as well as getting educated on women's rights issues, can help to challenge internalized beliefs. In order to embrace one's femininity, it might be helpful to show pride in traditional feminine things, and to avoid getting exposed to misogyny, either by taking a break from social media or staying out of spaces vulnerable to it. Confidence can also make it easier to embrace one's femininity and resist to societal pressure. It is important to remember that internalized misogyny is a normal result of living in a society that values masculinity over femininity, but it's not something to be proud of. By taking steps to understand and challenge internalized beliefs, women can work toward a more equal and just society. In a specific study about misogyny, named Women Experiences of Internalized Sexism, two major themes were highlighted when it comes to approaches among women to fight internalized misogyny. The first one is resilience. The responses of the participants of the study highlighted various coping skills and the ability to resist the impulse to internalize the sexist messages. Responses included a rejection of restrictive and limiting sexist ideals, behaviors, and beliefs. The second point was resistance. This theme reflected the variety of ways in which the participants revealed they resisted internalized sexism. From the responses, we can note that resistance could be either active or passive. Active resistance involves speaking out against sexism, engaging in counseling, education, and using a support system to process thoughts and feelings related to sexism. Many participants revealed that part of protecting themselves from internalized sexism included having a support system in which they could find trust, validation, acceptance, and understanding. Passive resistance examples were more on the spectrum of internal conversations that did not require any interactional exchanges, but more reflective practices. Resistance was a key theme that arose when women were asked about how they coped with sexism. Positive attributions also seemed to help. This sub-theme resulted from the responses that displayed positive attributions to being a woman. It should be noted that many participants were able to provide responses that show that they held positive views of being a woman without engaging in benevolent sexism. Some of these examples included warmth, strength, patience, wisdom, empathy, intelligence, and passion to recognize and fight back systemic oppression, and being strong, resilient, kind, compassionate, passionate, smart, feminine, and masculine, the connection with their own body and the amazing things it can do, and also the connection with other women for the same reason. Let's see now the importance of seeking out alternative narratives and media that empowers and uplifts women. First would be to provide a counterbalance to the harmful messages of misogyny and patriarchy that are prevalent in many mainstream narratives and sources. Secondly, promoting self-esteem and a positive self-image so that women can feel valued and confident. The third is create alternative narratives and media that can provide positive role models for women, demonstrating that it is possible to achieve success and happiness while also rejecting patriarchal norms and gender-based stereotypes. Fourth, let's use narratives also to encourage resistance to patriarchal systems and promote the rejection of internalized misogyny. The fifth will be supporting a community building that can help women connect with others who share their values and goals, and the creation of networks for support and activism. To conclude, it is important to notice a couple of housekeeping points. The studies I mentioned did not have any transgender participants. The studies also included women who had access to a computer and the internet, based on the nature of the study. Future studies should address this issue in order to provide an heterogeneous sample, where all women can be included in the study if they so wish to participate. In summary, internalized misogyny can be very impactful on women's lives without them even realizing. It can impact the way they see their body and their mental health. However, the symptoms of misogyny are extremely rooted in our society, and they're hard to fight against if conscious effort isn't put into contrasting it on a daily basis. The effects of internalized misogyny on women's lives can include limiting beliefs and behaviors, self-doubt and self-esteem issues. Strategies for overcoming internalized misogyny include self-reflection, critical examination of beliefs and attitude, and active or passive resistance. The participants in a study revealed coping mechanisms such as speaking out against sexism, using counseling, and having a support system. That's all for now. But please, if you learned something from this episode, subscribe. And also follow us on social media. Leave a rating or a review if you want, but most importantly, keep the conversation going. I would like to thank you so much for joining me today, and see you super soon. Bye!